of what I think we need to think about very deeply when we're thinking about this work is the snapback that can happen, the resilience of the dominant systems that we face and that we're trying to overcome in this work. And so I think when we talk about resilience, we often think of it as a very positive thing, but resilience isn't positive or negative, just as complexity isn't positive or negative, they just are. So we have to understand the resilience, not just of the work that we're doing, but the resilience of the dominant systems, which can pull us back and snap us back into old ways of doing this. And this can happen at multiple levels. This can happen for us as individuals. We can snap back because our mindsets, our mind hasn't shifted quite as much as we'd like to think. And so even though our frontal lobes are making sense of stuff, deeply embedded assumptions and ways of doing things are driving how we actually interpret and make sense and behave. And this is at an individual level, at an organization level, at the initiative level, and at societal level. So we need to sort of think about how things are snapping back, and therefore, if we can be more conscious of that, how we can mitigate that. When we think about resilience, we can look at it from a variety of different ways. Let me look at it first from sort of an engineer's perspective. If you're building a bridge, an engineer wants to make that bridge resilient so it can withstand shocks to the system. And what that means is it's going to go back to the way it was. So it has a big storm, but it's going to go snap back to the status quo. That's what engineering resilience is all about, right? Getting things to snap back to the way they were rather than to modify and change. We don't want to modify and change. So bouncing back to the status quo is what engineering resilience is about. This is radically different from ecological resilience. When we talk about ecological resilience, it's not about things being exactly the same or the status quo. It's about adaptation and deep change through creative destruction, which allows the system to continually learn and adapt. That's a very, very different concept of resilience. So when you hear people talking, there's resilience conferences all over the place. Find out if it's an engineering resilience conference, underlying the premise, or is it ecological? Because you'll have very, very different messages coming through in those two kinds of conferences. So let me give you another way of looking at this. Let's assume you've got a trough with a marble in it. Okay, so the top one here is the engineering resilience concept. So if you roll that marble around, it's going to keep going back to that equilibrium point. But in ecology, there are multiple equilibria. There are multiple adjacent states which are possible. And so there's that threshold, speaking of hump day, there's that threshold that we can go between states. And so, depending on how deep that trough is, that threshold will be either a high threshold, which takes a lot of energy to get it over that hump, or it will be a very shallow one, which won't take much to flip it over. Another way of looking at this is a resistant system, which is when the boundaries are so rigid. Remember, Dave Snowden talked about rigid boundaries have potential to break, be brittle and break. So that's a resistant system where you've made the trough so deep that it's actually just going to crack. So engineers do this more resilient piece, but with ecology, we're looking at multiple equilibrium. So let me take a look at this from perspective of CI. Let's assume I've got technical terms here, okay, not okay, and not okay. Okay, so these are technical terms. So the center here, let's assume that the okay state is we are actually doing this collective impact work. The two outside adjacent possible states are not okay. One could be that you are program focused, not system focused, picking up on John's language yesterday, where everybody's doing their own thing. Doing wonderful things, everybody gets wonderful intrinsic reward for it because I can look in the eyes of the person I've helped and it feels good because I've done that kind of piece. That's part of why it's such a deep trough. The other not okay state is when you've got someone outside, government or whoever, who imposes on the community, here's how we're going to do things, right? That's also a deep trough because we've got tremendous resources associated with that, a long history of that, et cetera. So you've got these two deep troughs. Meanwhile, we've got this fragile new collective impact trough coming there. The threshold between those, the collective impact and the not okay states is shallow. Doesn't take much for it to snap back into one of the other two not okay states. So what can we do about that? Can we deepen our collective impact. And that's what this summit's about. And this is what all this work is about. Can we get better language for it? Can we collectively share our wisdom and understanding of this so that we can understand this more deeply and therefore get that trough to have more resilience, if you will, and so that it takes more, it's a much deeper trough, harder than for it to snap back. But you still have those two not okay states sitting there lurking on the edges there. So the other piece too is not only just to work on building the resilience of the collective impact work, but decreasing the resilience of the other states. How can we change it so that those states are actually not resilient anymore, so we can actually get to a durable, deeper, and broader kind of trough? This doesn't mean there aren't other equilibria, other adjacent states beyond that. There will be. But for the time being, we're deepening and broadening that trough by paying attention to how do we increase the resilience of collective impact work and decrease the resilience of the traditional ways of doing things. How do we prevent this snapback? What is it that we need to do? And I think we've been getting all sorts of clues throughout this summit. So let me just pull out a few from these stories. One is we have to embrace unknowability. We have to embrace that things are actually not going to be completely figured out ever. And so, but I love this quote, why don't we do that? Managers would rather live with a problem they can't solve than with a solution they can't fully understand or control. Embracing unknowability is countercultural. It attracts our identity, our ego, the sense of who we think we should be and what we should know. So I think that is a huge challenge for us. Second thing is, and you've heard this all through this summit, relationships are absolutely key. So this expression I'm using today is choose your audience of significance. And so I was thinking about somebody I heard speak not too long ago, or a number of years ago actually, John Claypool. And he is a minister, but he's also an author. And he talked about how it was interesting when he got reviews of his work, how he reacted to them. He said if he got negative reviews of his work, but it was for people he didn't really care about their opinion, it didn't bother him at all. If he got positive reviews of his work from people he didn't care about, that didn't affect him either. But there were few people that were absolutely in his, what the language I'm using, audience of significance, that if they appreciated his work, it just was wonderful. And if they criticized it, that deeply cut or hurt because he was so aware of the fact that he trusted these people. I think we can choose our audience of significance. I think we can choose who are going to be our co-journeyers, picking up on some of the language that we've been using in this summit, to sort of help us along this, to help us keep the faith. And people, I think, are people who truly embrace the process, understand the tensions that are going to rise, and ask you to help keep the faith. I think these are people that don't necessarily have to like you, but they have to love you. They have to love you enough to be honest with you and to help you as you navigate these challenging kind of territories. So I think this summit is quite wonderful in terms of thinking about your audience of significance. So this comes in, for some of us, this will have a spiritual or religious kind of connotation. And so, but I think there's a piece here that's there, but it's also beyond that in terms of our thinking about who our human audience of significance here. Always think about how you can enhance those beneficial attractors, and beware of the fact that the dominant system is powerful attractors. It's a powerful attractor. We cannot lose sight of the attractiveness of that kind of piece. And so we've got to be thinking about how can we dampen that? How can we change resource flows, our time commitments, our behaviors, so that we can actually dampen those? And we need to have community ownership of the actions and the measurements, which of course is what we've been talking about all the way through here. We need to pay attention to engagement. We need to ensure that resources are available for listening on an ongoing basis, and that came through in this morning's reflections from some of you this morning. Individually, protect that space in your calendar and value it, whether it's a mindfulness, meditation kind of process, journaling, whatever it happens to be, you're talking with your audience of significance. Make sure that time is in your calendar and it's sacrosanct, that you are going to keep that time. Organizationally, reward people who take time to do this. Don't say that's the luxury that we do, but it's essential work. At the initiative level, ensure funders are aware from the outset that deliberations never end, that we always need to have money in the process and time in the process for that deliberative process. And that listening, engaging, pattern recognition must be supported forever. Beware of and this comes from the eco-cycle kind of adaptive cycle work that I know Liz is going to be doing in her workshop. Beware of something called the poverty trap. And the poverty trap here is where you have a lot of initiatives and you starve all of them. You don't give any of them sufficient resources, and this includes the deliberative community voice listening resource that we're talking about, community awareness. Be strategic thinkers, not merely strategic planners. Right? So being a strategic thinker is absolutely crucial here. So you need to reinforce strategic process that recognize the iterative nature of profound strategic thinking, kind of like a PDSA cycle, for those who know that from the Quality Movement Plan, Do, Study, Act, which is iterative kind of process. But that whole thing about this is not just done once. It is an ongoing iterative process, always paying attention. Pattern recognition is a skill that should be valued at all levels. All levels. So institutionalizing this by expecting it of yourself, of your organization, of your initiative, and look for the patterns that repeat at all scales of the initiative, because these are key, because these could be both functional or dysfunctional in terms of those patterns that repeat. Don't confuse quick wins with quick fixes, as we saw in one of those stories. Success is not a destination complexity, and we need to make resources for what Buzz Holland calls safe fail experiments. Not fail safe, but safe fail. That's safe to fail. And Melody was talking about that we should fail forward faster to increase the impact of our work. And Alan Broadbent cautioned us, though, when we're thinking about this, we have to think about this in a risk assessment kind of way, understanding what that really means. So we have to value failure because it's a learning process and make space for it, but we also have to be cautious and tentative about that too in terms of when we're dealing with people's lives. So there's another paradox. We need to have content expertise is great, but we can't let it dominate. And that is dominant legitimate rhetoric in Western society, is that content expertise is more important than context. And so we have to tip the balance, if you will, to say, yes, we value content expertise, but we equally value context expertise and put them on an equal playing field there. Trust the wisdom of the community. And don't forget, we need to have that community ownership of actions and measurements. So I'll end with one final quote from Dee Hock. Time is too short and things are too bad for pessimism, so move on.